A good evening and a warm welcome to the MS Subbalakshmi Auditorium for this talk by Yogendra Yadav this evening. A warm welcome to our guests, those who have responded to our invitations, to our students, faculty, our trustees, and all our friends whose goodwill we've cherished all these years. I'll make this very crisp and short because we want to hear the hero of the evening, Yogendra Yadav. He is, of course, a very heartening presence in our minds, particularly over the last several years, and particularly after the last election, because he resolutely went against the grain of the populist and perhaps was the only person who predicted broadly the outcome of this election. I'm told there are maybe a few others in terms of how it's headed and what's the outcome. And that required guts, because much of the mainstream media was in command performance mode or in a state of craven, supine, bias reinforcement mode, where they were saying what they thought the ruling party in power would like to hear, creating an objective situation, which I'm sure you probably touch on that. He's written on that after the election as well, about the very, shall we say, responsible role a section of the media, unfortunately a good section of the mainstream media, played in creating the atmospherics. And if it had been less biased, the election could have gone even better for the opposition. In other words, it could have been a more level playing field election, is what I understand from what Yogendra was saying. But we won't get into the subject because he's going to speak about it today. Yogendra Yadav, for those of us who just need the introduction for the sake of form, is a national convener of the Bharat Jodo Abhiyan. He wears many hats. He was among the founders of the Jai Kisan Andolan, Swaraj India movement, which he took up. As you know, he was briefly with the AAP party, Aam Aadmi Party, which he left, or he was forced to quit along with Prashant Bhushan in 2015. And Swaraj India movement was born then. But before that, we all know him. We have seen him in the media. We have seen him on television channels, particularly when elections are around the corner, where his astute predictions, his astute analysis has been very, very informative and very, very spot on in many ways. He's the founder convener of the Lok Niti Network and founder director of the CSDS Lok Niti Research Program. Some of you might have seen the series of articles of the CSDS Lok Niti, which were published in the Hindu, I believe, after the elections, shortly after. And there again, they were more or less spot on in terms of their prediction. I don't think they did seat prediction, but of the way it's likely to go. So so that is Yogendra Yadav, and today he's going to speak to us about raising this very question, I think, which is uppermost in most of our minds. Are we back to democratic politics? Reading the implications of 2024. So he'll speak for, I guess, up to an hour or 45 minutes, whatever it takes. And then we'll have some time for interaction with him, where you can, all of you, and I encourage students also to step up and ask questions. So we'll have at least a half an hour for that. So with that, a very warm welcome on behalf of all of us to Yogendra Yadav. Let me say how how quickly he accepted our invitation. He was not fussy about it at all, and I know he has a busy schedule. He's been moving around the countryside. From here, in fact, he's going on to Kerala, where he'll be speaking day after tomorrow at a Chinta Ravi Foundation Memorial Lecture. He's delivering that. And so we're very happy to have him here with us, and I wish you all a illuminating evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Kumar. Thanks for this wonderful opportunity to come to this extraordinary institution, which has kept the flame of true journalism alive in this country. I've met many of your alumni, some very bright minds, very good journalists, and therefore you didn't have to persuade me. You don't get this invitation every day, and I jumped at it. Thank you, thanks for this opportunity. And thanks for enabling me to speak about something which to my mind goes much beyond the elections that we are talking about. And that's what I really appreciate this opportunity for. In fact, I think I'll probably end up writing a small book, because what we have witnessed recently is not just an election and just one election outcome. This country has seen 18, but something very unusual has taken place, and we need to learn from that. And thanks for this first opportunity for me to talk about that big picture. Delighted and honored to see so many friends, some of the best minds in this country amongst us. And it's always a pleasure to come to Chennai for that reason. Thank you. The question is simple, the answer is not. Are we back to democratic politics? I think we need to ask at least 6 questions in order to answer this. And I'll try and ask those questions one by one and answer them one by one. The first question is, where were we? So back to democratic politics assumes that we were in something other than democratic politics. Indeed, that was the case. So where were we? Second, what was this election all about? I would argue that this was not an election. Third, which is to say, what exactly was at stake here? Third, what was the outcome? All of us know the numbers. But what's the overall outcome all about? Fourth, what led to this outcome? Why? Fifth, where are we now? And sixth, what's the way forward? Sorry, it's a very classroom kind of a thing, but that's the way I think. And as I said, because some of these questions are not really just questions about an election. These are questions about the future of this country, the very future of our republic, the very possibility of maintaining our republic. Where were we? My one-line description for that is, India was very rapidly, India had become, for the last 7-8 years, you could say 10 years, someone could say 5 years, India had become what should be described as competitive authoritarianism. Now, the point to remember is that this simple binary between democracy and dictatorship does not capture even 10 to 20% of the countries in the world. And in order to describe most countries in the world, now we have to think of hybrids. And one of those standard hybrids are competitive authoritarianism, where the government holds elections. There is some element of competitiveness about those elections. But there's very little democracy outside those elections. And elections themselves are structured in such a way as to give the ruling party a structural advantage. Now, so without getting into the details of it, there is a lot of technical literature now on competitive authoritarianism throughout the world. India had become a textbook case of competitive authoritarianism. So instead of simply calling it dictatorship, or to simply call it a democracy which was flawed, I think we had moved much beyond being simply a flawed democracy. We've been a flawed democracy for 70 years. But in the last 10 years, we had crossed to something else. So it was competitive authoritarianism mixed with non-theological majoritarianism. That is to say, countries which do not declare themselves to be officially a theological country. And my sense is that India is unlikely to declare itself into one. But for all practical purposes, it's a majoritarian country. So please remember these words: competitive authoritarianism, non-theological majoritarianism. This is what we had become. And we were very rapidly sliding towards a full-blown 21st century style authoritarianism, where competition was beginning to become a formality, and we were sliding towards a de facto Hindu Rashtra. Please remember, no dictator in 21st century wants to be seen to be a dictator. So there was a 20th century model of dictatorship where someone would wear a uniform, come to radio in those days, there weren't televisions, and say, do you have martial law, censorship? Dictators have become smart like everything else, like smartphones and everything. So dictators now know that it's silly to do those things. So every dictator holds elections in the world. Putin also holds it, for your record. So we were this is 21st century style dictatorship, where you don't officially do things like censorship, but someone who opposes you, that television channel somehow closes down in 3 or 4 months, or is bought over. You don't officially put martial law, but somehow all the dissenters find their way to Siberia. So this is what's happening. This is Russia, this is Turkey, this is Hungary, and this is happening in so many parts of the world. We were very rapidly sliding in that direction. We had reached end of the First Republic of India. It's a harsh thing to say, but the fact is that the Republic of India that was inaugurated on 26 January 1950 actually has come to an end. It came to an end around 2019. We are not used to those things. In France, they are more used to it. So their First Republic, Second Republic, Third Republic. So our First Republic is pretty much over. We were headed towards a new constitution without a new formal document called the Constitution. Constitution need not be written afresh. You just have to bring in a new amendment to change it completely. It happened in 1975-76. Just one amendment could change everything in the Constitution. So we were headed in that direction. So this is where we were before this election. What was the stakes in this election then? What was this election all about? What was the significance of this election? In one word, I would say, this was not an election, this was a plebiscite. The difference between an election and a plebiscite, as you all know, is that in election you choose your representatives. In a plebiscite, there is one question that everyone answers: Brexit, yes or no? So this was about seeking public endorsement for dismantling of the republic. In 21st century, you need public to dismantle the republic. And this election was about ensuring public stamp of approval on dismantling of our republic. More specifically, Modi ki guarantee was a catchword to legitimize all that this regime had done in the last 10 years and anything that it possibly could do in the next 5 or umpteen number of years to come. Mind you, this election was nowhere about this entity called NDA. Did anyone hear about it before the election results? NDA did not exist before the election results. This election was not about NDA, it was not even about the BJP. It was about the supreme leader seeking unconditional approval for his regime, Modi ki guarantee. BJP was in small fonts throughout the country. I've seen thousands of BJP hoardings. BJP would be written, BJP symbol was there, of course, but BJP party's name was in tiny font towards the end, as if it was just one of the sponsors of the hoarding, no more. Now, because this and every plebiscite has its own conditions of what would constitute a majority. You know, some plebiscites have 51%, some plebiscites put it higher than that. Because this particular election was a plebiscite, which was meant to get popular endorsement for virtually rewriting the real constitution of this country, formalities apart, the threshold was pretty high, although somewhat unspecified. 400 par, 400 plus, was indeed gimmick. Probably the BJP knew that they were not going to get it. That was definitely the upper end of the threshold. But my sense is that the regime felt comfortable in expecting a substantial improvement upon its tally of the 2019. So in a sense, the unstated threshold was that we would do even better than 2019. And if BJP had done 1 seat more than 303, that certainly would have meant yes in this plebiscite. For the last 10 years, I don't know if you noticed these things. In any television discussion, ask BJP spokesperson any question on earth. It could be about demonetization, it could be about MSP to farmers, it could be about Omar Khalid. The answer would be, people are with us. You know. And this is what was most important. This election was about being able to say that people are with us. And 303 plus was that threshold, which would have given that. And my sense is that ruling party very much expected this to be the case. This was not merely a plebiscite, it was a carefully controlled plebiscite. Given the high stakes, the regime left nothing to chance to eliminate the possibility of any real contest. All legitimate, semi-legitimate, and completely illegitimate means were deployed to ensure that the plebiscite produces the desired result. Ram Temple was to do in 2024 what Pulwama or Balakot achieved in 2019. Perfectly timed, 2 months before election. You know, I mean, it's sort of, it's just part of the electoral calendar. Perfect orchestration around that. I don't know if that frenzy reached Chennai very much. Fortunately, many bad things stop much before they reach Chennai. But in this case, I suspect it did reach Tamil Nadu as well. But perfect orchestration of a kind which is unprecedented. Careful strategizing, in the light of the results, many of us may not wish to believe in what I'm saying. But you see, I think, I keep saying this, Mr. Ram, very often, that all political commentators must listen to cricket commentary very seriously. Because I find cricket commentary is so nuanced and political commentary is so crude. No cricket commentator ever says that CSK won because their fielding was good, their batting was good, their bowling was good, their pacers were good, their slow bowlers were good, their fielding was good. No. You always come up with a nuanced thing to say, okay, in the middle overs, the spinners did this, and that really turned the game around. So cricket commentary is always nuanced, but in political commentary, whoever loses got everything wrong, and whoever wins gets everything right, which has always amazed me as a piece of such poor commentary and poor understanding. So today we know the results, but please do not forget that Ram Mandir bit was orchestrated perfectly. That they probably overreached is another matter, but timing, you cannot fault them for timing. The kind of massive reach out to the country, very few events, let's call it an event, very few events in the history of post-independence India had the kind of footprint that that particular event did. BJP had a strategy where a few years ago they had started thinking about Odisha, they had started thinking about what to do in Tamil Nadu, and as a part of that strategy, towards the last few weeks, they did the unthinkable in Andhra Pradesh, went and tied up with TDP, which was unthinkable a few months before. So it's part of an overall strategy that you need to have. Huge organizational machine, and something I was mentioning to Murli sir right now, something that we all forget. There is now a very large industry of political intelligence and political consultancy. These are thousands of professionals. I believe BJP employs about 2,000 on a salaried basis every month. 2,000 full-time professionals are doing nothing except gathering political intelligence and doing consultancy. This is the army being deployed to win elections. BJP had it all. The communication was focused. The dominance, the less said about mainstream media, the better it is, with the few exceptions. And is that a surprise that most of those exceptions come from English language, which doesn't fetch you many votes, and come from outside Delhi? The Hindu, Telegraph, Deccan Herald, and the Indian Express occasionally. Doesn't fetch you a vote. The interesting thing I've discovered in the last 5-7 years is that the BJP had put an informal ban on me from appearing on Hindi television. English, they don't mind. अंग्रेजी में कुछ बोल लो क्या फर्क पड़ता है? Hindi is where they have a problem. So all the exceptions come from English media. And since I have the misfortune of reading Hindi papers every morning, I can't tell you the kind of things Hindi media was doing. I mean, even BJP's official papers would not stoop to those levels to which they were stooping to support this. Anyway, that's a separate thing, and people who know this much better than me are here. I shouldn't waste my time on that. The interesting thing is that BJP worked hard and managed to almost match the dominance in social media as well, which they couldn't do with their ideas, but with enormous money infusion, even social media was matched. Unlimited money. This was not from a scale of 1:2. I know of several constituencies where BJP candidates spent more than 100 crore rupees per constituency, which includes some in Tamil Nadu. More than 100 crore rupees in one constituency was being spent. I needn't speak about the misuse of the official machinery, CBI, ED, all that is such standard stuff that I wouldn't take your time in talking about all this. A special word, of course, must be reserved for the utterly disgraceful conduct of the Election Commission of India. Election Commission of India it's not that Indian Election Commission has always been independent. Many of us would remember that before 1990s, Election Commission was not all that independent. But even the not so independent Election Commission would not do the kind of things that these gentlemen who occupy those 3 chairs today have done in this election. I say all this with a lot of pain because there was a phase where I was the self-appointed ambassador for Indian elections. And I used to preach to the world about beauties of Indian elections. And I would tell Americans, you can't get your Florida right. Why don't you come to India and learn a thing or two about how to conduct elections? And then when you see this being done, it truly brings me to shame. But anyway, all this is distraction. The point I was making was, it was not a competitive election. It was a controlled plebiscite, where almost everything was controlled. All was set for a formal endorsement, while 400 plus for the BJP was a public gimmick. Something around 325 plus for BJP and 375 plus for NDA must have appeared a very real possibility to the rulers. Everything was prepared for that. This is what this supreme leader not merely hoped, he expected it. Something like 325 plus for the BJP and something like 375 or more for the NDA is what they truly expect. I mean, all this preparation, control, and everything was for that. And if anything of that kind was achieved, you know what would happen next day? The public hamare saath hai. So then, everything would be bulldozed because the people are with us. What was the outcome? The trouble is that in a plebiscite, there are only 2 outcomes, yes or no. That's the problem with plebiscites. In Quebec, you've had plebiscites which have produced 51.5% vote for retaining Quebec and 49.5% votes for exiting, and Quebec being a separate country. So the trouble is that in a plebiscite, you either have a yes vote or no vote. In this case, the result was a clear no. And that is what is so remarkable about this election. With all this control, everything was done, script was ready, yet something went wrong. Let's not be deceived by numbers. 240, because if it was a normal election, anyone would say and should say that, look, a ruling party which has had 2 terms, you are in your 3rd terms. In 3rd term, things do get wrong. So even if you manage to somehow scramble a majority, well, that's creditable if it's a 3rd term. But that if it is a normal election and if it is a fair competition. This was neither. Let's remember what this contest was all about. It was about unconditional popular endorsement. Let's remember the threshold. Threshold was 320 to 350 for the BJP. Let's remember the conditions under which the elections was held, and then look at the numbers. Numbers do not make sense otherwise. Anything below 303 would have been a moral defeat for the regime. And this is not something I'm saying after the election. This is something I wrote and said throughout election. Anything below 303 would be a moral defeat for them. Anything below 272 would be a political defeat for the BJP. And anything below 250 would be a personal defeat for the Prime Minister, for the Supreme Leader. That's what happened. It's a moral, political, and personal defeat. Someone might say, well, the BJP actually improved in so many places in the entire southern eastern coastal belt. Yes, it did. But remember, number one, Mrs. Gandhi did very well in South India in 1977 after emergency. She almost swept it. How do we remember that election? As a defeat for the emergency. So number one, it doesn't take away from the overall character. Two, yes, in fact, that's what hides the extent of BJP's defeat. Because but for that, BJP was not down only by 63 seats or so. It's actually down by more than 80 seats. It's Odisha and other places which have kind of concealed it. But more importantly, this actually, BJP's good performance in some other parts of the world, country, actually strengthens my point. Remember, BJP has done well only in those places where it has improved, only in those places where BJP was the challenger. BJP was anti-establishment. It's a regional party which is anti-establishment. It is so in Kerala. It is so, trying to be so in Tamil Nadu. It was so in Andhra Pradesh, in Telangana, and above all, in Odisha. So, wherever BJP has done well, it is not an endorsement of the political establishment of the last 10 years. It is actually anti-establishment regional force which is coming up. Someone might say, well, they may have lost seats, but they've lost only less than 1% votes. That again is a distraction, because this 1% vote is a net outcome of plus and minus. But please don't forget that in this entire area from Karnataka to Bihar, the sort of, or let's say west and north of India, there has been almost uniform swing away of votes from BJP. Jharkhand, Uttar Pradesh and Bihar have produced very different outcomes. But in all the three states, there was almost identical swing away from BJP, 7% in all the three cases. Places where there was no loss to BJP have seen huge swings. Himachal, Rajasthan and Haryana have had huge swings. So the fact remains that the very large geography of this country has shown very significant swing away from BJP, which needs to be explained. And in any case, as I keep saying, this was under controlled situation, as Mr. Shashi Kumar said. You know, we played some thought experiments, some computer simulations, and I said, what? Let's imagine for a moment, since we are in a media college, let's entertain an illusion. Let's imagine that the media in this country had said, at the beginning of this election, if the media had said, this appears to be a close contest, we don't know which way it will go. That's all. I'm not expecting them to have said BJP is losing UP, nothing of that kind. If the media of this country had inserted this, had entertained this suspicion that this could perhaps be a close contest, that this was a contest to begin with, that would have easily moved 1 or 2 or 3% votes away from BJP. And I asked my friends to play this game on computer to see what would 1% achieve. And I said, don't take away that 1% from Odisha or from these places where BJP is going up. Only in places where it went down, what would additional 1% vote do? 1% additional vote would take 30 seats away from BJP. BJP would be down to 210. And 2% of national vote concentrated in these areas would take 54 seats away from the BJP. In both these situations, in the first situation, NDA and India would be tied. In the second situation, India would have a clear majority. NDA would be 40 seats below majority. This is the artifact. So let's not take these numbers as some gospel truths. These numbers have been produced by this artifact of controlled situation. In other words, there is no way to evade the conclusion that while the NDA has the numbers, it does not have the mandate. NDA has managed to cobble together numbers to form the government, and no one should quarrel with their constitutional propriety in forming the government. The president did the right thing. They deserve to form the government. I personally think that it almost was a boon in disguise that the India coalition was not called upon to form the government at this stage. But anyway, they had the numbers. But this was no unconditional approval. This was not a popular mandate. It is a government without Iqbal. Iqbal is a word that comes from Mughal courts, a word for sovereignty in those days. But in modern context, Iqbal would mean not just power, but authority, not just control, but a certain aura, not just a legal title, but legitimacy. If I were to put it in the language of modern political science, basically the hegemony of this regime has been fractured. That is what this verdict has done, and that's why it's such a major verdict. Fourth question, what led to this outcome? Now, that's a very complex story, and I would just skim through that very quickly because now the only one thing I would alert all of us is against a very routine temptation. In politics, we tend to read consequences back into intentions. We assume that something that has helped secularism must have been done with secular motives. Something which helps democracy must have been done with voters gunning against dictatorship. That's a simplistic reading. That doesn't happen because any plebiscite passes through multiple layers. Layers of people respond differently to the proposition, not just because they have different opinions, but because they are different persons, because they are located differently, because they read the question differently, because they bring different set of parameters to answer the question. So the entire sociology of Indian politics, the geography of Indian politics, everything comes into play. And as I said, since that's not my real focus today, I would just make a few remarks and then I wish to write about it, as I did after 2004. These are complex, it is tempting for me, it would be tempting for someone like me to say, people of India voted against dictatorship. People of India voted for secularism. But the story is not as simple as that. Yes, what has happened has actually strengthened secularism, or at least opened space for secularism. It has strengthened democracy. But let's not be so simplistic as to read that these two things have been achieved, that people of India have voted for that. You know, things we say in political rhetoric, we say these things. Because if that were to be the case, then much of our job in the future would be so much simpler. But I'm going to propose that our job is not so simple, you know. So what has, you know, it would be a mistake to assume that people voted on authoritarianism or on dangers of majoritarianism or on the supreme leader. It would be equally a mistake to think that the main reason was BJP's strategic mistakes. BJP is into analyzing it in the last 1 week. And this, you see, the interesting thing about all dictators in the world is that they look for every reason other than their own conduct. So you made a tactical mistake, this candidate was bad, Yogi was bad, no, Maurya was good, or some such stuff that keeps going on. And somehow the assumption is that BJP made some small strategic mistakes in the course of elections, which is not the case. I mean, they only made mistakes that all dictators always make in the world, which is hubris and losing touch with the people. But that's not a special mistake. I think it would equally be a mistake to credit opposition leaders with great political virtues. Their real virtue was that they stood up and they were there. And that's no mean achievement, given the conditions under which they had to fight this election. That they were standing there, that they were there, that they stood up, and some of them even gathered the courage to say that secularism is a virtue, that there should be that mohabbat is something that can be talked about in public arena and so on. All these are big virtues. But by and large, it would be a mistake to assume that opposition won this election by a great campaign or something of that kind. Frankly, I think the opposition could have done much better than they actually did in the last 1 year. My only problem is that because the conditions under which they were fighting election were so strange that I don't know how much to blame them or how much to expect from them, when you don't even know whether your own candidate tomorrow morning is going to be your candidate or not. I mean, remember what happened in Surat and Indore. I mean, these stories you used to hear about panchayat elections in Bihar. This never happened for a parliamentary election. That, your candidate is walking away with someone from the BJP. Collector is calling candidates, which they did in Indore. Collector was calling all the independent candidates to say, look, the Congress candidate is about to withdraw. I mean, Congress candidate has withdrawn. Everyone else has agreed. Come and withdraw. There are only 2 hours left. This is what happened in Surat. This is what was going to happen in Indore. The trouble in Indore was that there was a left candidate, a small party called SUCI. They had a candidate and he said, no way, I will not withdraw. That's why you had elections in Indore. Otherwise, everything was set. So in that sense, I don't know how much to expect from opposition when they did not even know whether their bank account is their own bank account, whether their candidate is their own candidate, and things of that kind. So, but anyway, I don't think we should start imagining that opposition did everything right. That again would be the kind of mistakes that cricket commentators don't make, and we should also not make. To my mind, the biggest reason is that people refuse to treat this as a plebiscite. They refused this invitation to a perpetual state of siege, anxiety, almost frenzy that we were kept in the last 10 years, where they would give up every other consideration except Modi. Basically, what happened was return to normal politics, which is what the BJP did not want. They wanted anything other than normal politics, because when you have normal politics, you say, why has this fellow not come to my locality for the last 5 years? Why is this road not working? Why this hospital is not working? And the name of the game from the BJP's point of view was to bypass all such things and to get people to vote. All that really, to my mind, the most important thing that happened was people said, wait a minute, we've done it for 10 years, ab nahi. Now we have to ask. That's exactly what people said in Uttar Pradesh to me again and again. Look, we've done it for 10 years. Now we have to ask, what were they doing? And that is, so it's return to normal politics. People converted this proposed plebiscite back into an election. A seat-by-seat election of representatives in which routine considerations play their role. Performance of the incumbent, everyday livelihood issues. And that is what began to matter. And when that happened, 2 or 3 things became very important. One was the state of the economy, which was truly in a very bad shape for ordinary people, continued to be in a very bad shape, unemployment, And what people called mehengai, I keep saying for my overeducated friends that what ordinary people call mehengai is not inflation. There's a difference between price rise and inflation. You know, what people call mehengai. So, you know, because a lot of economists say, but you know, our inflation levels are so low, what's the problem? When ordinary people say there is too much mehengai, what they are saying is, I cannot afford to purchase things that I really need to. They're talking about their lack of purchasing power. They're not talking about what the economists call inflation. That was the real issue. So mehengai, unemployment, and in general, the state of the economy. That was a very major reason. Then there were specific anxieties of some specific sections among the minorities, de facto being reduced to a second-rank citizenship. What would you do if that's what's happening to you? You would come together. You would vote in a strategic way. What option do you have? Although, I must say that there is enormous mythology built around Muslim votes and the idea that somehow Muslims of this country have ensured BJP's defeat. A, they don't have the numbers to do so. B, for all that mythology, the turnout of the Muslims is still lower than the rest of the population, notwithstanding entire mythology that you get about this question. And three, yes, they strategically came together in many states, and they were one of the factors clearly. Among Dalits, for the first time, at least for North Indian Dalits, North Indian somewhat educated Dalits, the message was, reservation can be challenged. You know, it's like the farmers' movement. In the farmers' movement, the unspoken message was that your land can be taken away. Now, what land is to the farmer, job and educational reservations are the same to Dalits. And the unspoken message was, this is under threat. And the moment that gets touched, that of course had repercussions. But these were sectoral things. I think it may not be correct to say that there was a widespread anxiety about constitution being taken away. That was very specific sectoral anxiety. Same in the case of Muslims. And there was a small slice of generalized unease about authoritarianism. Now, I'm partly contradicting what I said earlier. I said we should not simply assume that because an authoritarian ruler has been defeated, therefore people voted on authoritarianism. For the first time in travels, I heard the word Tanashahi, which is the Hindi word for dictatorship, spoken by ordinary people. And even BJP workers being somewhat uneasy about the kind of things Mr. Modi's government was doing to the opposition leaders, to chief ministers, to the kind of attack on dissenters, and that was being done. Just one last thing about the causes, because many of us have now started saying, look, money did not matter, BJP's media control did not matter, all the manipulations did not matter. Unfortunately, all of them did matter. That's why the BJP has 240. So what appeared as a severe reverses were actually potential disaster for the BJP, which was managed and limited since this was a controlled election. Money, media, and Modi myth did work. And they managed to salvage the BJP numbers. But for that, this would have been no different from 1977. But the reason why the numbers don't look like 1977 is this, that money, media, all this actually did work to the BJP's advantage. Fifth question, second last question, where are we now? Return to democratic politics? Not quite. We are poised at a very critical moment in the history of our country. When I started, I spoke of the end of the First Republic of India. If you ask me, where are we now? I would say, we are in the no man's land.
Please put off your phones.
I would say, we are in the no man's land between the First and the Second Republic of India. And that is what makes this situation so critical, so fraught with dangers and potential of possibilities. Therefore, it's necessary to separate. Hope can be very treacherous, and we can slip. And I see so many of my friends slipping on false hopes. Hopes like BJP, RSS have a tussle. There is no tussle. It will be resolved. And if it is resolved, it will be to this country's disadvantage. So these are false hopes. Or the idea that somehow NDA allies are going to really prevent the BJP from doing what it is doing. Unless the BJP is stupid enough to launch an onslaught against South India, which I think now they won't. One of the few very nice things about this election from BJP's point of view is that they are beginning to develop vested interest in South India, which is good news for democracy. So unless they do something as stupid as that, I don't think TDP is going to do very much. I don't think JDU is in much of a state to do anything. That's not where your hopes should reside. And I personally don't think institutions are going to change their character very much. The stranglehold that the regime has over our institutions is not going to change. I have mild hopes from media and judiciary, very limited hopes. With media, my limited hope is while they would continue to be the spokespersons of the ruling party, they may stop hounding the opposition, which is what they specialized in the last 5-7 years. If they were to stop just this little bit, I would see that as an important course correction. And judiciary, occasionally we can find slightly better judgment on a few things, just minor course correction. I don't expect any major change from judiciary either. Where do I reside my hopes in? My hopes are, one, in the opposition. The opposition has found its voice, as was evident in the last parliamentary session. Second, in resistance movements. Just watch the streets carefully. If democracy, republics are saved never inside parliaments. Republics are always saved on the street. So watch the streets carefully next few years. I expect resistance, protest movements to gather courage. Because in many ways, politics is like stock market. It's all driven by sentiments. Are you going up? Are you coming down? The message today to anyone who wants to stand up to this government is they are going down. Inko to dekh lenge. And that changes the character completely. That's my second hope. And my final hope is, this might look romantic, but actually the people. In this election, I traveled thousands of kilometers, spoke to thousands of people, because by the end of March, in the middle of March, I was so depressed. And just to, I think, cure my own depression, I started traveling. I spoke to thousands of ordinary people. And one thing I'm sure, Indian people will not accept dictatorship. That to me was the deepest faith I came back with. And I said, even if BJP gets the majority they want, if people know that their democracy is being taken away, they will not allow that to be. Finally, the last question, I know I've exhausted my time, so I'll just quickly go over it. What's the way forward? Is it the beginning of the end of Mr. Modi? I'm afraid that would be too rash a conclusion to draw. One thing you can be sure about Mr. Modi, he will not preside over the meltdown of his government, unlike Mr. Manmohan Singh, he will deploy every trick in the book, outside the book, wherever. Most of these would be dirty tricks. We have already in the last 1 month witnessed that the government hasn't learned almost anything. Look at the president's address, as if they've got 350 seats. Look at the manner in which the speaker has been elected. Look at the speaker's conduct after that. Look at the manner in which the ruling party has behaved. Look at the lynching on the streets. Look at the bulldozers being used. Look at what's being done to Arundhati Roy, to Medha Patekar. I suspect the regime will be even more repressive than it has been so. Because Mr. Modi has to recover his Iqbal. He has to demonstrate that I'm as strong as you always thought I am. And because the numbers are down, he has to be even more repressive. So I don't think it's a very easy story. His institutional stranglehold continues. Misuse of state power would be even more than before. So something will have to be done. There are two readings here, and that's the final point I would want to make. I think many friends would agree that yes, political opposition has to do much more. Opposition has to be proactive. You cannot simply wait for this regime, the decline and fall of this regime. That won't happen. You have to work for it on the street. There are two possibilities here. One is that, okay, there are elections coming. In coming elections, work to defeat Mr. Modi's government. Gradually, the government, is pushed. Allies start rebelling. Things start happening. And the regime goes out, which is to say, you fight a battle to reclaim democracy in the electoral political arena. Somehow, I think there is another possibility. I don't have the time today to explore that in detail, but let me just mention that. To my mind, in India, a battle to reclaim constitution and democracy by itself may not succeed. A battle to reclaim the constitution and democracy has to be combined with a social radical agenda. And this moment in history offers one of those rare opportunities that come only once in 25, 30 years, that you actually combine political and social agenda. What do I mean by social agenda? Economic front. Basically, the way to take on the BJP would be to create a social coalition of the bottom of the pyramid, of the poor. In fact, strange as it might seem, and it might tickle my friend sitting here, this is actually a moment for class politics in our country. I'm not one of those who say it all the time. I say there are moments which come and go. This is the moment for a very sharp class politics, to actually talk about redistribution. I mean, somehow we have made redistribution into a cuss word. The allegation is these people talk about redistribution. Sir, the constitution of this country talks about it. There is directive principle of state policy that talks about, preventing concentration of wealth in this country. So this is the moment. So the point I'm making is that the way for recovery of democracy is not merely through political battles for recovery of constitution and democratic norms. It is in and through struggles on the question of class, on the issues of caste and patriarchy. if you push these three struggles, it is in and through this that you can actually recover democracy. This is one of those rare moments, radical moments in our history. What would it mean? Specifically, it would mean three kinds of actions. In the electoral contestation domain, ensuring that BJP's defeat continues. Because BJP, Mr. Modi, and this election machine would do everything possible to stall this series of defeats, which they've had even in the by-elections a week ago. I think the next 10 by-elections in UP, and particularly the 3 assembly elections that are going to happen, BJP would put in everything to ensure that they are not seen to be on a losing streak. And the challenge is for the opposition is to ensure that the defeat streak continues. But more important than that, there is the question of strengthening resistance on the ground. The farmers' movement has already given a call for a nationwide struggle on the issue of MSP. There is the question of caste census. Adivasis have been drawn towards the BJP, and the one segment in which BJP has increased its vote share this time is the Adivasis. A very significant movement is required there. So the second domain would be working on resistance on the street. And the third domain would be cultural ideological contestation. I have 0 time left now, but I would just mention what to my mind that cultural ideological contest would be. People like us must concede that we have lost a cultural ideological battle. We need to regain it. And in order to regain, we need to regain 3 things: nationalism, civilizational cultural heritage in its multiplicity, and religious traditions of this country. We cannot turn our back to either 3 of these things, which we have. So that's the third domain where we need to operate. To my mind, what looks like what has been a very grim moment in our country's history, which has led to the collapse of the First Republic, need not be somehow an attempt to recover some fragments of the First Republic. We shouldn't try that. That's impossible. You do not go back in history. It has to become a battle to create and reimagine a second Republic of India, a second republic which redeems the constitutional pledge contained in the preamble to our Constitution. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that very characteristically incisive, knowledgeable tour de force on what has happened and the prescience of what might happen. Open floor, so please raise your hands and just so that we have some system in this, and wait for the microphone. There are microphones to come to you before you ask a question. Yes, we'll start with the gentleman Yogendra Yadav said was tickled by something he said. Mr. G. Ramakrishnan, Politburo member of the CPM.
You have characterized the present situation like de facto Hindutva. At the same time, you have said it's non-theological majoritarian like that. I think there is a contradiction between when you say it's a de facto Hindutva, something to do with the theology. Hindu Rashtra. So de facto Hindu Rashtra is something to do with the religion and the theology also. Is it not a contradiction when you say de facto Hindu Rashtra and non-theology?
I'm glad this enables me to clarify something. You know, RSS has zero interest in theology. They do not want a situation where you declare it to be RSS does not want a political rule of the Hindu Shankaracharyas. They basically, the name of the game, RSS has as much interest in Hinduism as Jinnah had in Islam, which is to say close to zero. It's the name of the game is about claiming to be the sole representative of the majority community, to assert the will of the majority community, de facto reducing minorities to the status of second-rate citizen. And with CAA, it's not just de facto, it's almost de jure, second-rate citizens of, specifically to Muslims, without making it theological. You see, the moment you make it theological, which is to say the moment you, then you have to share political power with religious leaders. RSS doesn't want that. So it's very much Savarkar's dream. Savarkar had zero interest in theology. So this is the modern version that's coming up. And my own sense is that if BJP had its way, they would probably not insert the word Hindu in the constitution. They would probably introduce the word Sanatan. There would be a hint in the preamble. So I, when I was extremely depressed in the month of March, I was trying to imagine what is it that they would do to the constitution. And I was reasonably sure that the word Sanatan would be inserted in the preamble to the constitution. So that's the kind of thing they are onto.
Thank you so much, Yogendra. Now, as we reflect upon whether you call plebiscite or the election, also what could have happened? You yourself wrote so, insightfully about the caste census in Bihar. The question is, why did the opposition alliance lose Nitish Kumar and also TDP? What could have been done there? Secondly, in terms of the cultural question and the religious question put together, now what are some fundamental challenges for all sections of society? Political leaders, civil society actors, also classroom students and teachers. The question of Hindu religion, for example. Now, Ambedkar has some engagement with that, but our education system does not really prepare ourselves to reading the many texts, So therefore, the struggle there in terms of redefining Hinduism from multiple sources, if you come from Karnataka, from the Sarana literature and others. The third question is the question of dynasty. The Second Republic, how does it address the disjunction between social justice and dynasty? All the opposition leaders, they are wedded to the cult of dynasty. And what is your thought on that? And finally, the whole question of a new politics. Because the new politics in terms of just freedom from arbitrariness, like arbitrary arrest by the police, is not just limited to Mr. Modi. All the occupants, whether it is Karnataka or in Bengal. So what is the possibility of day-to-day freedom that the opposition leaders could really ensure?
I think it's only fair to say that threats to democracy in this country did not begin with Mr. Modi and are not limited to BJP. That's a very fair statement. Mr. Modi's BJP has taken it to a level that it requires our foremost and undivided attention. Having done it, I would be with you in addressing all other maladies as well. Somewhat similar is the issue of dynasty. You singled out the opposition. I would invite you to look inside the BJP. How many dynasts the BJP has? Everywhere. And BJP allies. Who is Chandrababu Naidu? Something to do with the dynasty, I suppose. I think while we all identify the problem, I mean, dynasty is clearly not a natural expression of anything democratic. There is something unhealthy about it. The root cause of that is that we have almost blocked all possible avenues of entering politics. Colleges, we have stopped student union politics. Street, if you go to street, you're put inside jail. So no protest on this, How did we come to politics? You and me, all of us had interests. College, university. So so there's a sort of humongous hypocrisy at work in India. We have blocked every possible legitimate avenue of coming to politics for good reasons. And then all of us wring our hands and say, oh my God, these bad people have come to politics. I mean, we are responsible for that. You close all the doors of this room and say, why are people using the back door? Well, because you've closed all the front doors. That's really the case. So that's the dynasty part of it. On Bihar, I think the impression people, because we tend to read election results only from seats. So the impression is something dramatic happened in Uttar Pradesh, and exactly almost the opposite happened in Bihar. But as I mentioned in the course of my talk, the swing away from BJP is identical in Bihar and UP. BJP lost exactly 7% votes in both these states, also in Jharkhand. But why is the result so different? The result is different technically because the margin in Uttar Pradesh was only 12%. So 7% swing could completely wipe that out. In Bihar, the starting point was 23%. But the political answer is, so 23% gap is not wiped out by 7% swing. But the political answer is that with Mr. Nitish Kumar switching sides, however immoral it was and appeared to all of us, many friends also said, oh, he has lost relevance, his changing sides makes no difference. And I kept saying, so Baba, please don't underestimate these things. When Nitish Kumar switches sides, and the reason why the Prime Minister and Modi went and to ensure that he does, is because it makes electoral difference. So because the very large coalition that BJP had in 2019 in Bihar, which is not just a political coalition, it's also a social coalition, they managed to hold on to that social coalition, which meant that they could control their damages in Bihar, something they could not do in Uttar Pradesh. Your second and most important question, on which I'm closer to you today than I was 10 years ago, and probably more distant from most of my friends in this room. I increasingly, as a second generation atheist, I increasingly think that we secular people made a very serious mistake by turning our back to religion. Which is not to say that people like me should, pretend to be religious when we are not. But I think we've not understood religion. And you spoke about Hindu religion, I would extend it to all religions. And so what really is happening is a very serious corruption inside every single religion of this country. We somehow notice it in the case of Hindus because it's writ large and the largest community gets to notice most. But this is happening inside Indian Islam, this is happening to Indian Sikhs, this is happening to Indian Christians. I have no hesitation in saying that. Till 50 years ago, public intellectuals and social activists had a certain presence inside all these religions. They could cleanse it. They could point fingers at them. a Swami Vivekananda could say, don't waste your time in temples, go and play football. He could say that as a monk. Today, if you and I try to say that, you know what would happen to both of us. You know, this is the rot that has happened in the cultural religious domain. That only external markers are enough. So on a Ram Navami, you can pick up a sword, which has no sanction in the religion, which has no sanction in our tradition. I think people of secular disposition have simply turned their back to religion, which has made us ineffective, which has completely marginalized us. But that's a small tragedy. The bigger tragedy is which has left these religions open for capture by goons, by thugs, by shopkeepers. These are the ones who are ruling all the religions, not just Hinduism. So I really think a serious re-engagement with religion is called for. I don't know how many of us agree, but I increasingly find more and more merit in the way Mahatma Gandhi related to this question.
Hi, I'm Abhishek. So my question is about the South, especially Kerala, because currently Kerala is in a very scary situation to anybody. And I'm not talking about Suresh Gopi. He has built for himself an image of a king giving rice down. But beyond Suresh Gopi, you have somebody like Anil Antony in Pathanamthitta constituency who has garnered significant number of votes. And the BJP has, in Kerala, increased their vote share through successive elections. So why is it that such is possible? And why is their cultural project unaddressed till now?
I wouldn't know as much about Kerala as many people sitting in this room, so they can answer that. I'll just make 3 or 4 elementary remarks. Number one, RSS is not a new phenomenon in Kerala. It's a very well-entrenched old phenomena. Number 2, I said something about BJP being a force of anti-establishment. You see, anti-establishment has a charm of its own. And when the establishment begins to reach a plateau, and when people begin to see that as an establishment, there's always an opening for a new party. Could it be that LDF-UDF rivalry or LDF-UDF politics is beginning to tire people? That they are looking for something new, and that neither LDF nor UDF is able to offer that new. With my comrade sitting here, I would hesitate to comment on the LDF regime in Kerala. But I often wonder how leftist it is actually. I don't quite know. And how leftist can it afford to remain? I don't know. So in a sense, strangely, in places like this or in Bengal, BJP is beginning to have that charm that left used to have 50 years ago. That's the strange thing. And that's something to really work and think about.
You mentioned redistribution. In the Congress, as far as I know, only Sam Pitroda boldly took it up, and they backed off, and he was made to resign his post, and then now he's back. Could they have done much more on that? Would that have helped the cause of democracy and also, to some extent, in the electoral outcome? And the second, I'll ask only 2, not 4. On what is possible now for the BJP regime, the Modi regime? Will the dependence on allies and other factors and also what you said about the South, if you don't mean that NRC, as Amit Shah has repeatedly asserted that we are going to go ahead and so on, is that going to take a back seat? And or the Uniform Civil Code, what, I mean, if you can imagine, what would they have done had they got one big, say 330 seats, you said, plus the rest more for the NDA?
Thank you. You know the answers better than I do in both cases. On the redistribution issue, bringing it up suddenly in the course of election doesn't work, especially if you do not have the kind of propaganda machine that BJP has. Mr. Modi can introduce something in the course of election and expect it to affect the outcome. No one else can do it because the kind of megaphones he has, no one else has, and so on. So if Congress tried to do that in the course of elections, it would have probably not worked, may not have reached, and so on. To my mind, the more interesting thing is what is it that it can do now? If it is carefully built, and you cannot just announce it before elections, you have to build it for 5 years in the course of various, with small and big things. Not going to the big and fat wedding of this country is actually a very important statement. I would tell, it's as important as a manifesto piece. You know, you're making a statement. So the point of, as I mentioned, I really see a very serious possibility of a politics of redistribution to be carried out in this country. The potential of which was demonstrated by none other than Mr. Narendra Modi. If you recall his justification of demonetization. And for the first few weeks, what is it that he was playing on? He was playing on poor people's anger against those who have hoarded money. He played it so successfully without touching those who were hoarding money, you know. But it showed a potential. That potential, so, you know, no matter what, our political culture has not become American. In this country, you can speak of the poor without being awkward and ashamed, unless you read only the pink press in the morning and evening. Otherwise, I mean, that's 0.1% of this country's opinion. Otherwise, so speaking about the poor, whatever positions Rahul Gandhi has taken on crony capitalism, and he's among the very few politicians in the country who's taken some public position on this question, that has only gone on to strengthen his image. So in our country, it doesn't work against that. So I see enormous possibility, provided they systematically build upon it. Not merely one little welfare gesture here or one little statement here. I seriously see, it's a bad parallel, but just to illustrate what I'm saying, you know what Mrs. Gandhi did in 1969? There was, in the context, there was nothing that would suggest the sudden left turn that she took. And the kind of political transformation she managed to achieve with the help of that, in a somewhat cynical way at times. My reading is that Indian politics offers that window. It's a short window, but it offers that window for some time, if some politician has the courage to take it up. The second was about, sorry. And what would the BJP have done? I mean, there was, as I said, Sanatan in the religion, and some version of NRC, etc. My interest currently is in trying to think about what would Mr. Modi do now in this desperate situation to somehow keep the Hindu-Muslim thing boiling. One is, of course, the UCC. And my sense is, we've never spoken about this particular issue. My sense is that secular politics is playing it the wrong way. Instead of resisting uniform civil code, we should simply welcome it. And we should say, the name of the game of the BJP is to show you a closed envelope called UCC, never really reveal the content, and invite you to oppose it. And we all stand up and start opposing it. Would it not be better if we say, show me the content of the envelope, I'll respond to it after that? When they do it, BJP would have to deal with the Hindus, who have such diverse practices in this country. How would the BJP handle that? So I think we have to have more intelligent ways of handling issues of this kind. Very often, BJP lays a trap for us, and we put our foot squarely inside that, which is like the recent Supreme Court judgment. I really see no reason why the secular politics is keeping quiet on that or being defensive about it. It's a very good judgment, should be supported. On the judgment about Muslim women's maintenance. It's a very positive judgment. We should just come out and say, yes, we support it. So I think they would use traps of this kind. NRC is tricky. You know it better than I do, that in Assam it backfired on the BJP. Because, basically BJP thought this was going to be their ultimate weapon against Muslims. They carried it out, and more than half the illegal immigrants, by their definition, were Hindus, because it was done properly. So that's basically what happened in Assam. And with that kind of an instrument, what can the BJP do? Now it's NRC plus CAA. So basically, NRC would have meant just doing an NRC would as much work against some Hindus as it would work against Muslims. But NRC plus CAA ensures an exit gate to all the Hindus. And then news is only on the Muslims. That's basically the trick. That could be one of the things, but to try and do that to the rest of the country, playing it in Assam and bordering district of Bengal is one thing. Doing it in the entire country, I think is beyond even the BJP now. There were things that BJP could have done before this election. And to be absolutely honest, if BJP wanted to rig this election, they could have actually rigged it and gotten away with it. With all these exit polls and everyone providing them a perfect cover, they could have done it. Now they can't do it. Once it has been demonstrated that you are on the way down. So my sense is that this too over-cynical move can now backfire. BJP's options are relatively limited now. That's my sense. But you're asking me questions about which you know the answer better than I do. So I don't know.
Good afternoon, sir. I had this question. You mentioned about anti-establishment of regional parties. How did anti-establishment not work in West Bengal? Is it that people voted against the lesser evil, that is the popular term that is used there? Because they did it for Didi against CPM. So why did it not work for BJP when it could work for TMC?
It's a very good question, and it is still a puzzle. I still believe we should not think that BJP's threat is over in West Bengal. BJP is there to stay. They are making very serious inroads. I would not rule them out. In this election, it didn't work. But BJP is still the future challenger and anti-establishment force currently available. Why it did not work this time is probably I'm not the best person to answer that. one of the things is that is that it has something to do with the people, but more to do with the party structure. After BJP's very pronounced intent to win assembly election in Bengal and its spectacular failure, after that, actually the party crumbled. And in Bengal, and this is not a new story for Bengal, party crumbling is not a metaphor. Buildings crumble, people are shot, people flee, all kinds of things happen. The underbelly of Bengal politics has been very nasty for a very long time. So part of the answers may be in that domain. And the other answer is that Mamata Banerjee as a politician has shown enormous resilience. Very few, I mean, if you want to see how is it that, you know, if someone were to write a textbook on how to take on the BJP, Mamata Banerjee could write it. You know, just sheer. But, you know, my sense is whoever has taken RSS BJP with determination and resilience and tenacity, they've always succeeded. Mamata Banerjee, Arvind Kejriwal, farmers, whoever has dug their heel, they have won.
I wanted to ask, I have, like, since past 10 years, and many people will agree with me that a majority section of the society has become religious intolerant, maybe because of the present regime. So you mentioned that bringing religion into play will help to, like, go against the BJP or like the ruling party. So bringing religion into play won't make the more, like, less secular our society.
It's a very legitimate anxiety. I fully understand that. Two things. One, let's try and change our language. It is not that society has become intolerant. It is that politics, led by the most powerful and visible leaders in this country, have actively fomented hatred against each other. So it's not that something was happening on the ground, politics happens to have picked it up. No, politics is causing it. That's the thing. And what I'm suggesting in response to what Professor Giri said is not of re-injecting religion. Religion is there. And I'm simply making a plea to people like me who are not religious to understand religion. We simply thought all religion is superstition, all religion is bogus focus, all religion is opium of the masses. Incidentally, when Marx said about opium of the masses, there was actually a lovely sentence that we forget in what Marx had said about it's the soul of the soulless. That's the thing that precedes saying opium of the masses. And we forget the soul of the soulless part of it. That sigh of the oppressed. Soul of the soulless, sigh of the oppressed, opium of the masses. Unfortunately, we remember only 1/3 of that sentence. I really think I'm not advocating raising the profile of religion in politics. No. I'm saying that all of us, religion is here. We are in a country where 90% or more people have some religious convictions or the other. I just want us, secular people, those who call themselves secular, but I see most of them do touch wood and things of that kind. So apparently English superstitions are all right, but others are not. But I want us to understand, you know, the more I think about it, and as I said, I may be in a minority of one or two in this room, but I want to say it. The more I think of it, I see religion as a language, no more. In a language, you can write love poetry. In the same language, you can write bloody slogans. Same with religion. You can use it for the worst kind of superstitions. You can use it for the most inhuman barbarity and oppression and hierarchy. And you can use that language for justice, for equality, for humanity. It's a language. And why quarrel with the language? I should quarrel with what you do with the language rather than the language itself. And I think for far too long, we have quarreled with the language. Or to put it even more sharply, one of my teachers, a Marxist incidentally, used to say there's a difference between alphabet and words. He said, you can quarrel with words, but never quarrel with alphabet. Because if you quarrel with alphabet, you would be mad. Because then you cannot read what others are writing, you cannot explain what you are saying to anyone else. And I suspect we, the seculars, may have spent too long time quarreling with alphabets, which we shouldn't.
So do you mind if I ask my question in Hindi? Yeah, so, मतलब, सर आपका जितना भी काम का एक्सपीरियंस रहा है, आप एक बहुत बड़े चिंतक रहे हैं इस देश के, मजदूर वर्ग के, किसानों के, और भी जो कई लोग हैं. तो आप जितनी इतिहास की समझ रखते हैं और प्रेजेंट पॉलिटिक्स की समझ रखते हैं, तो आपको क्या लगता है कि इतिहास में वो समय है जब आप जो क्लासेस की बात करते हैं, हिस्टोरिकली नथिंग हैज़ चेंज फॉर देम, नॉर अंडर बीजेपी, नॉर pre-liberalization, post-liberalization, and things have progressively gotten worse. So what I could infer from the last part of your speech, कि आप कह रहे हैं कि क्या ये इतिहास में फाइनली वो समय है जब हम सत्ता परिवर्तन की नहीं बल्कि व्यवस्था परिवर्तन की बात करें, और हम मेन स्ट्रीम पॉलिटिक्स में कुछ ऐसे शब्द लेके आए जिसको सुन के मतलब कुछ इंटेलेक्चुअल्स हैं, मतलब मैं एमपी से हूँ, वहाँ पे एक फ्रेज चलता है कि छाती पे सांप लौट जाना, तो कुछ ऐसे वर्ड्स हैं जो काफ़ी इंटेलेक्चुअल्स सुन के घबरा जाते हैं, जैसे सरवारा वर्ग या पूंजीपति वर्ग या मजदूरों की सरकार और ऐसी कई सारी चीज़ें. तो क्या फाइनली हिस्ट्री में ये मूवमेंट है जब हमें उन सब चीज़ों को वापस रिवाइव करके मेन स्ट्रीम पॉलिटिक्स का हिस्सा बना के और इस हिसाब से इस देश की सोशल पॉलिटिक्स को ऑर्गेनाइज करना चाहिए? Also, just one clarification, when I use these words, I don't use them how CPI, CPM will interpret it, because one can only laugh at the state of how left they have been in the history of this country.
That was a tail swipe.
Yeah.
No, but the rest of the question was actually straight from a left point of view. It must also be clarified, because the basic question was, have we come to a moment in our history where the socialist or the communist dream can be realized of a revolution led by the working classes, by the proletariat, which would usher in social transformation, broadly speaking. And he said this is not, and then in clarification he said that this is not to put it in the vocabulary of CPI or CPM, etc. One thing about the left, incidentally, the day after tomorrow, he's given me a wonderful opportunity in Calicut. I'm not asking you to travel to Calicut, but my lecture in Calicut is on what does it mean to be left in today's India. Because I think we really need to go back to that. I think in your anxiety to distance yourself from CPI and CPM, which I also wish to, you may have been somewhat unkind to the left. I must clarify that I come from a non-communist socialist background, and one of my first political intervention in my student life was to ensure the defeat of SFI. You know? When I think back, and then you know, the generation that I come from and my learning, there was a lot of anti-communism in that, a lot of angst and anxiety and anger against the communists and so on. Now that I look back with some distance, while I do not endorse many of the things that left does, especially when they were in power, but I think one thing we must acknowledge, and just out of fairness, not as a friend of the left, I think left did most to democratize Indian democracy. Otherwise, this country's democracy may have crumbled much before that. In deepening, I mean, the mission of the left was not to deepen bourgeois democracy, but they actually did so. And broadly speaking, if in left you also include the socialists and so on, they must have given another additional 25 years to democracy in this country. So they really democratized democracy in this country. Left may not have created revolutions. And incidentally, most political ideologies never realize themselves. But the left produced some of the best thinkers, some of the best teachers, some of the finest literature, including some of the best love poems. And these are not small contributions. I think the transformation, I mean, this is not it's not an incidental point. I think the contribution of the left to public culture of this country is very, very deep. And that is something, so I would not judge the left by what the CPM government did in West Bengal. That's only one of the measures. But their contribution to public culture is very deep. To come back to your question, have we reached that moment in our life where suddenly that classical learning has become relevant? Yes and no. I did say that class is more important. I almost, one of the naughty things I want to do one day is to write an essay on persuading my Marxist friends to take class more seriously. Because somehow, when Indian state had enormous autonomy, at that point we were studying in JNU and we said state is the agency of the bourgeoisie and everything. We thought state has zero autonomy. And today, when the state actually functions like an agency of the bourgeoisie, I mean, how else do you describe some of these actions? It's absolute straightforward state acting as an agency of the bourgeoisie. We have lost that vocabulary today, So that's the strange part. So I did say that class politics has more relevance in Indian politics, especially in urban India. The potentials of class politics in urban India are very seriously underestimated and underutilized, even by the left. Having said that, I would want that entire vocabulary and the theoretical apparatus to be substantially revised. There are times, so very often we say to people that one of our criticism to people in public life is, you're all theory, your practice is very bad. It's a hypocrisy. To many of the leftist friends, I actually have been meaning to say for a long time, your practice is lovely, your theory is all wrong. So the moral intuition of the left has actually been very good. The trouble is that they don't use words like moral intuition because their theory does not allow them to speak. The vocabulary of the left does not allow them to talk about why they became leftist in the first place, which is a moral intuition, which is a deep sense of justice, injustice, right and wrong. That vocabulary we have lost. So I really think that the entire theoretical apparatus needs to be rethought. I would not think of India through categories like the proletariat. But the idea that class is a deep, deep fact of our social life. And that undercuts even caste. When I was a student in JNU in early 80s, no one spoke about caste. Everyone spoke only about class. And the joke was that we found class struggle behind every cockfight. But today, the pendulum has swung absolutely the other way. All of us are talking about caste and thankfully gender as well. But we have actually seriously forgotten, underestimated the class battle. This entire thing about NEET is a straightforward class battle. You know, NEET is not, I mean, the more you think about the NEET scandal, and how basically this country's rich have ensured an invisible reservation for themselves over all the medical colleges. It's a straightforward class politics. And no political party in this country stands up and talks about it. You know, I mean, Parliament should be stalled on this question. So I think there's enormous possibility. The challenge is to rethink the theoretical categories through which we operate that. That is our real challenge. But I find the left continues to be relevant as long as we can redefine what it means to be left.